Welcome back to the Geek's Guide to the Beach Boys. I'm Adam Marsland, your friendly and affable host. First of all, I want to thank everybody for what, for our little YouTube channel, was a pretty massive outpouring of support for the pilot show. As a result, as promised, we're doing another one. Before we get into that, I want to remind everybody that we're doing a Patreon drive to expand the channel. That's to enable me to have the time to continue doing this show and also my other show, Adam Walks Around, and also keep putting up archival music videos. And the really cool thing is we never had enough Patreon subscribers before to make it worth doing Patreon-only content. Now we do. So there's a pretty good chance that I'll be doing some special videos for you Patreon subscribers. Also, I just put up 3 videos from when my own band 15 years ago did a tour of Carl and Dennis Wilson's stuff. We were trying to do for Carl and Dennis what the Wonderments did for Brian. Videos from a pro shot that was done in Indiana. Really good performances of Heroes and Villains, What's Wrong from Dennis's solo album, and Got to Know the Woman. The website for our Patreon page is patreon.com/karmafrog1, the numeral 1, that's the name of the channel. As for the response to the show, you guys were incredibly sweet. It was pretty much overwhelmingly positive. I think one person somewhere had something bad to say. I don't know what that was about. But anyway, yeah, and in the comments thread for the show, there were all kinds of people telling me in the sweetest possible way that I got something wrong, which was really kind of nice. And I just want to make it clear that there was a time I was about as deep into this stuff as you can get. And I did step away from the whole Beach Boys world for a while, and some people have gone further down the rabbit hole than I have, and some of this is me kind of coming back to it with a little bit of perspective and maybe a little irreverence. But I don't have a big ego about being right or wrong. Feel perfectly free to use the comments thread to challenge anything I have to say or put your own ideas or theories. That's what it's there for, and I'm hoping that the comments thread can become sort of a compendium of Beach Boys trivia, if you will. Now, helping me on this show this week, again, Craig Slowinski, probably the foremost authority on who played what on Beach Boys records. A little bit of input too from Alan Boyd, the Beach Boys archivist, and also some people that were kind enough to write in with some things that they wanted me to flag, and I'll be getting into what they had to say later and my reactions to that. My big takeaway from the whole comments thing is I should try to make as many mistakes as possible so that more of you comment. However, what it did do is it made me go a little bit further than I did last time. Now that I know someone's actually going to watch this show, I actually dug a little bit deeper. For about half the album, I imported the tracks into Pro Tools and broke them down and put them under a microscope. So hopefully I'll be able to be even a little more wonky this time out. This takes us to Surfin U.S.A., the Beach Boys' second album. It was released in 1963. What day, you ask? I don't know. This is YouTube. You're supposed to be Wikipedia. Thank you. March 25th, 1963. I think that puts us at just 6 months-ish after Surfin Safari. Something I didn't know in researching this was the biggest selling album of 1963 according to Billboard, even though it only made it to number 2, I guess, for chart duration. Likewise, the single, the title track, Surfin U.S.A., even though it only made it to number 3, was supposedly the biggest selling single of 1963. That's pretty wild. First of all, it's an incredible improvement from Surfin Safari. I guess we mostly have to attribute it to the band just playing a lot of gigs and getting a lot better at what they do, but what an improvement in all fronts. Production quality, performance, vocals, it's a really solid record. Also, this is kind of an interesting artifact in that it's probably the only time the Beach Boys tried to be a bona fide surf band. I mean, they have a reputation for being that, but really, surf music was kind of an established genre in Southern California at that time, spearheaded, of course, by Dick Dale, but there were lots of other bands doing the thing, and they were all, you know, better than the Beach Boys were at first. So this is kind of their attempt to say, hey, we can hang. You know, if they were a hip-hop band, they'd be trying to be more street. You know, I guess this is kind of their little throwing down the gauntlet going, hey, we can surf too. And they do a pretty credible job. There are 4 instrumentals on this record, which is the most that the Beach Boys ever had, to my knowledge. And it's a good record. They pulled it off. There apparently was a little bit of a power struggle between the Capitol-assigned producer Nick Venet and the Beach Boys' dad, Murray Wilson. What a big shock, right? So from what I understand, there was a power struggle. Venet won it for the first album, and Murray won it for the second album. I mean, that's really oversimplifying, but let's just oversimplify. It's not clear how much Venet was involved in this. He was definitely calling takes for the sessions that were done at Capitol. And I should probably get into where and how and when this was recorded. There was a session or 2 done at Western Recorders in January of '63, maybe even 3 sessions. We'll get to that in a minute. And then things were moved over to Capitol a little bit later in the year, I think in February. Again, we'll get into that. I don't think Venet was even there for the Western stuff. He may have been, he may not have been, but there's definitely a difference in the production, and it's pretty noticeable. The other thing that's interesting about this is Mike is actually a member of the band here, not just vocally, but instrumentally. He's playing sax on a lot of this record. You'd never know it because you can hardly hear him. I mean, you got to get the headphones on. You really got to listen. You got to know what to listen for. But he's there a lot, and it sounds like they didn't put a mic on him. It sounds like they just said, "Okay, Mike, you got your sax. Go over there and blow," and then the drum mic picked him up, something like that. But yeah, unexpectedly, Mike's on a lot of these tracks, but you really need to have an audio microscope to hear him. I'm not sure if that happened again. I know he's on a couple other albums, but this may be the only album where he's actually trying to be, an instrumentalist just like everybody else, and they let him try. And he does add a little. Even with the places where, you can barely hear him, it does have a little bit of a, it's a pretty stark sound. So having that little buzz off in the distance, that does do something. So anyway, I think that's all we're going to say about the album because there's a lot to say about the songs. So let's get right into it with the opening track, the single, Surfin U.S.A. And with that, we're off and running. I told you a little bit on the last episode that the band didn't really have its sound together for the Surfin Safari album, but boom, with this single, it's all there. Carl got himself a new guitar, Fender Jag, and his sound from here on in will be crystalline and beautiful. The vocals are double-tracked and right in your face. The band is much tighter. It's just, boom. They've got it. Here's the sound, and it's no wonder the thing took off like it did. This song establishes what would be the pattern for the band's early hits, which is Mike taking over the primary lead vocal spot. In fact, he's pretty much the lead vocalist throughout this record, with a couple of exceptions where Brian is. But this establishes the ping-ponging of Mike doing the primary lead vocal and then Brian offsetting him, usually on the choruses, doing the falsetto. There's a lot of lore about how this song came to be. It's a rewrite of Chuck Berry's hit Sweet Little 16. But the rhythm is quite different. It's quite a different song. And this came about because Brian had this idea of doing a sort of a travelogue, an idea that he would revisit with California girls, except in this case it was all the surfing spots in Southern California. He interviewed his girlfriend Judy Bowles' surfing brother Jimmy to get all of the spots, I guess because Dennis was too busy out actually surfing. And Brian fashioned this into a song with some probable help from Mike. Now, a lot of you know that Mike Love got into it with Brian in the early 90s. There was a lawsuit because Mike felt that he'd been denied credit on a lot of songs he contributed to. Some of his credits are a little controversial, but some of them seem pretty legit, and I would say this is very likely a song that Mike had input into. Brian admitted as much in the mid-'70s in an interview, and with the immediacy of the of the lyrics and just how quickly the stage is set. If everybody had an ocean across the USA, boom, once again, right there, you're in it. That's a little bit more of a Mike wheelhouse than a Brian wheelhouse, so I'm prepared to give Mike due credit, along with Jimmy Bowles and Brian, for coming with just a smashing idea for a single. A lot of you know, and those of you who are casual fans have no doubt heard, that an elite group of session musicians from Los Angeles did a lot of the instrumental work on the Beach Boys' 60s records. They've since been called the Wrecking Crew. And a couple of the members of the Wrecking Crew have claimed that they played on this recording. Now, most of you have probably heard, and especially for casual fans out there, that the Beach Boys, by and large, didn't play on their records, that it was mostly done by the Wrecking Crew. So for the benefit of any new viewers, new fans to the band, anybody just stumbling along on this channel, let me just say for the record that that is bullshit. The Beach Boys did actually play on the bulk of their records, at least in piecemeal fashion, and quite often as a band, sweating it out in the studio, cutting tracks. There was only about a 2-year period in the mid-60s, from late 65 to mid-67, when the Beach Boys were largely supplanted in the studio by session guys when Brian was doing his most adventurous work. But even then, you know, Carl and Dennis kept their hand in, did some tracks here and there. So the person that is most affected by this in terms of his reputation is Dennis. The narrative has emerged that Dennis was the wild man. He wasn't really minding the store. He was really the image of the band, and he just bashed out the drums, but he didn't really do much in the studio. He left it all to Hal Blaine. Once again, sorry to be crude, this is bullshit. Dennis actually played drums on about half of their hits. However, he didn't play drums on Surfin U.S.A., at least as far as we can tell. However, neither did Hal Blaine. There's no evidence that any of the Wrecking Crew were on this recording, and in fact, it doesn't appear that Brian met them until shortly after. However, there was a guy named Frank DeVito. He was sort of a second string session drummer, and he apparently is the drummer on this recording, and he had some very detailed information to share about it when he was tracked down years later. It all seems to check out. However, it gets us into the question of why Dennis didn't play on it and what Dennis actually did do. So we're going to refer back to the Bellagio 10452 website, and I'll explain the first kind of puzzling mystery of this album. So the popular story for those in the know is that Brian was replaced on this song because he had injured his foot. And in fact, he was replaced on some gigs around the same time because he had injured his foot. Okay, so Dennis, did I say Brian? Dennis. If I didn't say Brian, still Dennis. So we have the first session for the album proper at Western on the 5th of January, where Surfin U.S.A. may or may not have been attempted. Presumably Dennis is the drummer on that. Then we are fairly certain that on the 31st, Frank DeVito cut Surfin U.S.A. with the band. Now, there's some disagreement. Some people think that they tracked it on the 5th and then Dennis's drums weren't cool, so they overlaid new drums on it. Other people say, no, they cut a new track on the 31st. I listened to it. I don't hear any evidence that there are 2 drum tracks on there. So my opinion is they cut it anew on the 31st, but I wasn't there, so I can't say for sure. But where this gets weird, okay, so the album mostly cut in January and February. So we have the Western session at the 5th. I don't remember if the Frank DeVito session was at Western or somewhere else. Someone can tell us in comments. Then we've got sessions over at Capitol on the 11th and 12th. And then on the 15th, 3 days later, Dennis is replaced by a ringer named Mark Grosclose, I believe. Yes, Mark Grosclose replaces Dennis. So Dennis is theoretically on drums on the 5th of January. Frank DeVito replaces Dennis on the 31st because his foot's messed up. Then Dennis plays 2 days straight on the whole album, and then 3 days later he can't play a gig, so there's a ringer to play for him. What? Dennis is rocking out in the studio, but he can't play on Surfin U.S.A. and he can't play a bunch of gigs after he's finished the whole album. So I tried to get to the bottom of this with Craig and Alan, and here's the best theory I can give to you. Dennis had 2 accidents. A little home mishap after being in an altered state and bashed his head on a bathroom sink. And then there was another accident where he injured his foot in a car crash. This is peak Dennis, really. Now, I've broken my ankle before, and I would say it would be, it would take, about 4 to 5 weeks before you'd be able to whack a bass drum too hard. That would be my guess. With Dennis, you'd probably shave off a few days on that. But the one thing about Surfin U.S.A. as opposed to nearly everything else on the album is it's all bass drum. So you hear he would be just pounding on that right foot. Everybody had an ocean, bump, 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 across the USA, bump, 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 bump. And on the Surfin U.S.A. album, Dennis he's got a beat he likes. He plays it a lot, and it's not as taxing as the Surfin U.S.A. beat. So my guess is that he probably was able to keep a beat, but he couldn't hack Surfin U.S.A. So they got another guy in, this DeVito fellow, because Dennis just couldn't keep the 4 on the floor going on the bass drum because his ankle wouldn't hold up. And then he'd healed enough to record the bulk of the tracks for the album, but then he might have worn out his foot, and then he just couldn't play anymore, and that's why they got the substitute drummer, again, for the gigs right after it. That's a guess, but it's the only way any of this makes any sense. Sort of finishing up the whole thing with where the band was at instrumentally, let's talk a little bit about poor David Marks. Now, Dave was pretty much on the same level of guitar skill as Carl was, but because of his non-family status, Murray wouldn't let him play lead. So Dave started looking for little moments to make a power move when nobody was looking. Go, hey, I can do this too. And you can hear the first one of these at the very end of the song at 2:06 and 2:31. You hear a little Dick Dale run go. That would be Dave going, hey, I can play too. So when I worked with Dave Marks on his album back in 2016, he told me that he sang on this record and that Brian had him double Dennis because he felt like that harmony was weak. And he remembered singing on a few tracks on this album. And at that time, I went and tried to find him, and I thought I had located him on 3 tracks, one of which is Surfin U.S.A. I do believe I hear another voice besides Dennis doubling him, and in fact his part on Surfin U.S.A. is really, really, really present, and I think that is the reason for that. Now, one of the people that wrote into me with the most detailed observations was a guy named John Brode, and John, thank you so much for that email, and I'm going to get to most of what you said. John also is hearing some stray voices on this record, but he feels that it's Bob Norberg, which was Brian's roommate and somebody he was collaborating with at the time, and not David Marks. Once again, I wasn't there. I'm just going by what Dave told me. I don't have any reason to think he was lying about it, but we'll get back to the whole is Dave on this record or not in a later spot. There's an absolute spine-tingling moment to me, and that's the moment when the organ solo is about to happen, where DeVito goes into a great fill, and honestly one that was probably beyond Dennis's ability at that time, and Brian just holds the organ down for an anticipatory chord for 4 beats, and that is just hair on the back of your neck, and then great Hammond organ solo, perfectly executed, and then right over to Carl for just, I think it's 2 bars, but a really great precise solo. And apparently this was done by the brothers live as they were dubbing from tape to tape. So if you can have a visual of those guys with their headphones, they're running tape back and they're ready to do their thing. And Brian goes and then Carl goes. It's a great thing to imagine. So that's Surfin U.S.A. The only other thing I have to say about it is Leif Garrett covered it. I don't remember it either. Next song, Farmer's Daughter. Now, I bemoaned the lack of great Brian Wilson melodies on Surfin' Safari. Now, this is a melody. Also, someone wanted to hear me sing the high note, so here it is. I come. Anyway, Brian is doing his first double track lead vocal, and it is sweet. We talked a little bit about Carl and Dennis, where they were in the stack. It seems like they mixed it up a little bit more on this album, but to my ear, on this one, Carl is on the bottom of the Wilson triad as he was on the previous album, Dennis in the middle. Something I want to call your attention to on this one is there's just great syncopation with the band. The guitars are grooving. Brian's bass playing is just perfectly bridging it between the drums and guitar. He has developed as a player a lot since the last album. Really impressive playing on this one. Fleetwood Mac did a cover of it in I think 1980, I want to say. That was when Christine McVie was Dennis Wilson's main squeeze, and it was partly done as a tribute to him and to Brian, and a cover version worth seeking out. Next, Misirlou, first of two Dick Dale covers. I did a gig with Dick Dale once. I didn't play with him, but we were on the same bill, and we shared a dressing room, and I don't remember how this came up, but he started talking to me, and he wound up actually giving me a guitar lesson, showing me how to play Misirlou. And I actually have had to play this a few times, and I want to get a little bit into this because if you notice from about 36 seconds in, Carl's guitar is double tracked, and it's kind of to cover a screw up. And this is no disrespect to Carl, because this song is not easy to play. And one of Dick Dale's tricks is he used 17 gauge guitar strings, which is really heavy. Now this is a 12 string, so it's a little easier to play, although I don't know if I can still play it, we'll find out. But you get, now the bass strings, all right, so that sucked. But anyway, so in the bass strings, this isn't so hard, but when you get to this part, okay, so award for the worst guitar playing of 2021 to me, but even on the 12, where I've got two strings to work with, it's tricky to go. That whole section actually is the hardest part to play. It's not because the strings are thinner. So Carl slightly blows it, which doesn't surprise me because I blew it every time, same place he did. Anyway, so they have a second guitar coming in to sort of make that part smooth over a little. But you know, not an easy song to do, and I think definitely they're kind of going, hey, we're a real surf band, check us out. Brian's bass on this, again, wonderful, playing really, really nice. Also, listen out for Mike, way in the background, he's back there. Stoked! So Mike starts it out and he sounds stoned, but we'll assume that he's not. The band is not as tight as on the previous track. However, you can hear the beginnings of Dennis as just a slamming, driving force. And I said earlier, I theorized that Dennis was replaced in Surfin U.S.A. because he couldn't hack the bass drum part on it because of his ankle injury, but the bass drum's quite present on this one. He's just really pushing it through there. This track gives us a good sense of the state of Carl's guitar playing, and there's, it's your standard surfing instrumental. Now, there's evidence of some overdubbing on especially on the instrumental tracks where they had more tracks to work with because there's no vocals. This isn't one of the ones I really broke down in detail, so I won't get into it here. So, moving on from Stoked. Lowly Sea. Wow. This song is awesome. This is just, here, Brian, here he is, the melancholy side, the beginning of the thread that takes us to Pet Sounds, Until I Die and Beyond. It's right here. Brian is doing a single track vocal and he's killing it. It's great. The instrumentation, the guitar tones, the aura of the track is just terrific. Now you can tell it's the band in its earlier stage, and I'll get to why that is in a minute, because Brian in particular is not playing great, but it doesn't really matter. Now, Lonely Sea was cut in April '62. It was actually cut prior to the Surfin Safari sessions as part of that same session where we got Surfin Safari and 409, I think. Now, why they kept this track, which is just head and shoulders above pretty much anything on the last album, why they left it off, could be because it would have made the rest of the album sound like dog crap, or it could be because it was just too melancholy and it wouldn't have fit on that record. But regardless, this is really where we start to see a hint of genius. This is the first song with a really amazing kind of chord sequence. We start out with, I believe it's in C. The song's a little bit in the cracks between pitch, which means it was sped up at some point, but let's assume it's C. So we got a standard sort of descending. The lonely sea. Okay, so we get that a couple times, and then we move to minor. It moves along from day to day. Wow. See, now they were going somewhere else. That's just for 62. And there's even a third part to it. This sun in my arms, this pain in my heart. Please tell the truth. Anyway, it's slightly corny, but not really. I mean, it's just, this song is just awesome. So that gets us to some specifics of the session and the second great mystery of who played what. So apparently Al Jardine has a pretty vivid memory of singing on this track. And it is possible because he had only left the band a month or two prior to the recording of The Lonely Sea, and we know that Brian used him on, I think on a track for Hype Morgan, I don't remember which, but there was something he sang on after he left the band. So then it becomes, if he's on it, why and what's he doing? So this is one of the ones where I put the track into Pro Tools and tried to figure out what was going on. Now, the backup vocals on this are really sloppy, but they have tons of feel. I mean, they're really, really moving. So here's the magic keyboard right here. So for the harmonies, there's basically 4 parts, and there's 2 of them that are really loud, and they're both on what we call the tonic, the C chord. You got Mike down here, and you got someone here. And those people are both louder than God. And then on either side of the higher louder than God person, there's someone on the 5, ba, and someone on the 3. So basically, I can't really do this and show it to you, but you've got, wait, I can do this. Anyway, screw it. So you got basically a C chord. The louder than God bass person is definitely Mike. And to my ear, the louder than God person singing the C in octave higher is definitely Dennis. The other 2 people are really hard to hear. But the top vocal, tonally, it's hard to imagine it being anybody but Brian. I'm just imagining anybody else singing up there, whether it's Al or Carl, what they'd sound like. It sounds like Brian. And so then that leaves us the part under Dennis's. Now, this does sound a little like Al, but it is so quiet, it's hard to tell, and it sounds just as much like Carl. Now, it does sound later in the song like there's 5 parts, but that's actually just the 4-part harmony meshing with Brian's lead. So, I'm certainly not going to dispute Al Jardine's recollection, but to my ear, if Al's on this track, then Carl isn't, and that would be kind of strange. I can think of two reasons why this would be. One might be that Carl was just sick or just couldn't sing for some reason. Another is that this mystery part pairs off with Mike at the end of the song, and it gets pretty low. Carl was a very versatile vocalist, but the only time I've ever heard him struggle is when he's had to go really low. Al, on the other hand, could go pretty low. So if I'm prepared to say that if Al Jardine is on this, then I don't think Carl's on it. There's also the chance that Al could be misremembering. They did perform this in a movie later, so he had another crack at the song at that time. We don't know, but Al may be on this song. All right, so that's Lonely Sea. Shut Down, the B-side to Surfin U.S.A. Quite the high-charting single in its own right. I don't remember, 20-something. I'll put it up later. Let's talk a little bit about Roger Christian. Roger Christian will become, along with Mike Love, Brian's new favorite collaborator. And even though I think this is his only track on this album, he'll be doing lots more stuff. And in my opinion, Roger Christian is the great underrated lyricist of the Beach Boys history. I am not kidding. You can say, well, the guy just wrote about cars. It's like, who cares? Great lyric writing is the art of taking mundane observations and making them poetic. There's so much detail about this car race rendered so poetically. Just think of this line: declining numbers at an even rate, at the count of one we both accelerate. That's poetry. I'm sorry, that's great. Because they're just talking about the race starting, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. And Christian found a way to render that into poetry. This is one of my very favorite Beach Boys lyrics. I'm not kidding. Now, something that I didn't know is that there is some controversy over who actually won the race. The lyrics are a little vague. They end right at the point when it seems like the narrator's about to win the race, and there's an implication. Buddy, now I shut you down, that the race is over. However, apparently racing experts have weighed in, and they believe that that Mike Love's car should have completely lost the race. There was just no way it was ever going to happen. I don't know anything about cars. I just think that's kind of interesting. In terms of instrumentally, we've got more sparkling guitar from Carl. We've got Dennis, again, he's in his new position on the lower harmony of the triad, to my ear. Mike gets a solo, a sax solo, his shining moment, one that he plays in concert to this very day. Dave Marks goes off the reservation again at 1 minute and 37 seconds. That's Dave going, hey, I can play guitar too. And then somebody at the end goes, roof. Since Nick Vinay did the barking on the last album, I don't know if he ran in and did another dog thing. I don't know. Probably not. That's it for Shut Down, but what a fine song this is. Noble Surfer. I do believe this is Mike Love coming in with a co-write. Oh, that came later. Okay, so Mike's co-write credits came later, came in the 90s. I will say that I'm prepared to buy that he did write lyrics on some of these. And by the way, I'm not a Mike basher. I'm not a reflexive Mike basher. To me, I have a certain amount of love for all of the guys, and I also know that they're flawed human beings that were raised in difficult circumstances. So that's just how I look at them all, and they each have their own perspective on what the band was to them. So I'm all about good vibrations and not assassinations. But I do try to call them as I see them, and the songs that Mike is credited with writing on this, they're kind of loopy, the lyrics on them. I think Noble Surfer is their attempt to be edgy, because what they're really saying is no bull, as in no bullshit. That was like, I'm old enough to remember that even saying bull when I was a kid in the early 70s, that was kind of like almost like swearing. So they were able to go no bull, but no, they mean noble, right? So they're kind of sneaking, they're being edgy. They are singing in the background, by the way, Nobaloo, which is really funny in my opinion. But the other thing to call attention to is Brian's solo on the Celeste. It's a sort of a bell-like keyboard that existed in those days. It's just a mess. This isn't the kind of a keyboard you want to do this kind of a Surfin U.S.A. kind of solo on. Tons of clams. It's just a jumbled, yeah, it's not good. So anyway, moving on from Noble Surfer ain't Josh, and it's whatever. Okay, Honky Tonk, the third instrumental. This is a cover of a 1956 hit single by somebody. I didn't bother to look it up. Sorry. James Brown actually covered it in '72, had a top 10 R&B hit with it. You'd never know. This isn't as tight as, say, Misirlou, but there's some good syncopation on it. Again, the band's playing like a band. They're all finding their little niche. And again, I do believe I hear Mike's sax somewhere in the next building at 1:09, 1 minute and 9 seconds. A special shout out on this track to the guitar tones. They're just articulating wonderfully. Real step up on the good guitar sounds on this record, and you can really hear it on Honky Tonk. Next track, Lana, oh Lana dear, the first appearance of many of Brian's hammer hands piano. Audrey, the Wilson brothers' mother, taught them all to play basic boogie-woogie piano, and they all developed from there. Oh, interesting stuff here. It appears that Carl is on bass. There's only one guitar, and it sounds like David doing his downstroke thingy. There is, I suppose, a slight chance, since it's Brian's favorite little dong 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 dong, that it's Carl on piano and Brian on bass. But most likely it's the other way around, Brian on piano. Denny's playing his favorite beat that we hear so much on this record. Now the solo is another watermark moment for the Beach Boys, because it's the first time we hear Brian actually layering instruments, which is something he got more and more into and reached its apex on Pet Sounds. That's where you take two instruments, you have them play the exact same thing, and create a larger and more complex tone. So the solo here is the Celeste again, this time used more appropriately, doubled with Carl's guitar. Now, John Brode, very kindly in his email to me, said that he felt that he had discovered that Brian was also playing an accordion behind all this, and I did get the headphones out and check this out, and John, I do hear what you're hearing, but I'm pretty sure it's not an accordion. What it is it's a little bit of, what's the word I want to use? A little bit of ambience from the vocals, plus Mike Love's sax, once again, way in the distance. And those two sounds together do sound a lot like an accordion, but what the edge you're hearing there, that's a little bit of vocal bleed plus the sax, pretty sure. You know, on this one, it sounds like Dennis is back in the middle harmony, and it does sound like on this one too, he might have a doubler, whether it's Bob Norberg, as John has suggested, or David Marks, as David Marks has suggested. We don't know, but both John and I think we do hear someone else on this one. So, what else? Nothing. Okay, next. Surf Jam. We've got Brian yelling in the left channel on the Stereovision, Dennis yelling in the right channel, and I wondered if this wasn't overdubbed, so I got the headphones out, and actually it's the same performance, but it gives us a sense of how they mic'd up the band, because on the left channel, you've got Brian, Carl's reverb return on his guitar, and Mike's sax, a little bit closer to the mic this time. And then on the other channel, you've got Dave, Carl dry, so without reverb, and Dennis playing the drums and yelling at himself, because at some point he goes, "Come on, Denny," and I do believe it's Denny yelling at himself. He also yells at Carl at some time. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's Murray? I don't know, but it sounds like Dennis to me. I don't think it's Murray. Hope it's not Murray. That's a troubling thought. You do hear a little bit more of Dave's wannabe lead playing at some point. There's also a lovely little collapse of the band. 48 seconds in, I think David's the culprit there. And then Carl has a loose guitar note at 1 minute and 2 seconds. But I'm not dissing the guys. This is another very credible surf instrumental performance. They're hanging right in there with the bands of the time. And this is the first song credited to Carl. I apologize, it's not the first song credited to Carl because he had a pre-Capital song called Karate. But this is the first song on an album credited to Carl. It is no Long Promised Road, but it's kind of cool. Let's Go Trippin', another Dick Dale cover. Pretty well done. Mike's in there playing his sax. Bass is pretty inaudible. 1 minute and 13 seconds, Mike screws up and then Dave screws up. I don't know if they were telling a joke or something, but otherwise, again, a very competently done cover of a popular surf instrumental. Finders Keepers. Okay, more Brian piano at the beginning. And this one, it sounds like they did an overdub where Brian and Carl did a piano and guitar part respectively on top of the original band track. And it does sound like there's no bass on this, but I got the headphones out and I did locate the bass. You can hear it best at 1 minute and 33 seconds, but Brian might as well have been playing an organ for all you can hear it, but he is playing bass on this and overdubbing the piano from what I can tell. This song's increasing the complexity again of Brian's compositional style with a tempo change in the middle. This is another song that establishes the Mike Brian ping pong bass vocal, falsetto vocal, lead vocal tag team that they've got. Also at this point, the guys have started to work out the balance issues that they had on Surfin' Safari. Dennis is starting to sing more in tune, and he's starting to nest in with Brian and Carl a lot better. So it's getting a lot harder to be absolutely sure who's singing what, but to my ear, Dennis is in the middle on this one and Carl's on the bottom. But they're singing, "Oh Mama." I don't understand the storyline on this. I've never did. It's about the theft of a surfboard. It's unclear if the thief is male or female because she says first and then he says second. And apparently Mike puts up a flag and that causes the guy to wipe out and the board floats back. I don't understand any of this. So Mike, if you did write this lyric, and I tend to think you did, you want to come on the show, explain to me exactly what happened. I will treat you with great respect and deference because I really want to know how did the meatball flag resolve this situation for you. Incidentally, this is yet another song with Mike's sax blaring inaudibly in the background. He's back there. Listen for him. So that's it for the main tracks. We've got 3 outtakes that appeared at various points. There's a song called "Cindy, Oh Cindy." Brian's howling at the moon. More weird sailor lyrics a la Land Ahoy. Single track, but nice reverb, nice feel, a little erratic. Brian's definitely stretching his vocals out. It's mostly working out for him. A couple of weird spots. I don't know the provenance of this track, but this sounds like it's pre-Surfin U.S.A. It sounds like it's a 1962 track to me. Then there's the Baker Man. Oh, I love this track. This is a first sign, basically, of Brian's off-kilter, sense of humor. It's his semi-serious attempt to start a new dance craze. Arthur Murray's getting blurry trying to cop that jive or whatever he says. And at the end, he just starts advocating spousal abuse in the end of this song. I guess I shouldn't laugh at that in these more serious times, but he's obviously not really advocating beating your partner up, but it's pretty out there. I would love to know if Dennis is drumming on this. It's a nice tight track. I actually, my band performed this with Steve Marco of the Abe Lincoln Story, doing a really great little performance. That you can find that on YouTube if you're interested. And then finally, Punchline, yet another instrumental. This was recorded just prior to the rest of the sessions at the very beginning of January. I don't know why they didn't use this, especially since they had a dedicated session for it. That's a little weird. It sounds just as good as the other tracks. It's got piano and organ, which is unusual. They've got 2 keyboards on this. And some interesting changes, lots of modulations. great guitar tone at the break, and some maniacal laughing, and I'm guessing they didn't use it because A, they already had too many instrumentals, B, it's ridiculous, and C, the band actually falls apart at the end, which I invite you to listen for. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Surfin U.S.A, except I really like this record. This is just a giant step up from Surfin Safari. The sound, the performances, the production, they really started to pull it together here in a big way. I would give this album a solid 7. I think it's a great record, and in probably the peak of the band as a sort of self-contained band. Session musicians start to creep in next album, but very few ringers here, if any. So that's it. If you enjoy Pet Squares, please subscribe to the Karma Frog 1 channel. It may be a little while before we get to the next album, Surfer Girl, because I have to return to my other show, Adam Walks Around. I filmed a lot of stuff before I left the United States for a very, very special episode that I think a lot of you geeky types will get into because it's got a very geeky theme. I don't want to give it away, but I do want to say, although it is not coming next Sunday, it will be coming to you in the not too distant future. So that's all I have to say. Stay tuned for more Pet Squares, more Adam Walks Around, and remember to click the Karma Frog logo to subscribe to our channel. This is Adam Marsland signing off. Good whatever it is for you.